So welcome everybody to this side event, Voices for Climate Justice and Inclusive Nature Action. For those wishing to use them, we have headsets which can make it a bit easier to hear, even if you understand the language being spoken. Channel 18 is for the audio in the room. Channel 19 is for Spanish translation. Que 19 para español, para los que necesitan. We just have English and Spanish in the room today. I am kicking us off. I may at some point be effortlessly replaced by Ruth Davis, the Special Representative for Nature. But until then, you have me. My name is Mark Ducrocquet-Lavin. I'm a Deputy Director in the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs in the UK. I will hold this looking at some of the faces there. So I will get us started, and as I say, we may kind of shift when Ruth gets here. We're joined by an esteemed panel across from me, who will all have a chance to speak to you. We have a couple of presentations as well as we go along. I'll let you guys introduce yourselves as you begin, but we have May Ong, who's a senior researcher for the Climate Change Research Group at IIED, based in the UK. We have Sara Omi Kasama, an Indigenous women's leader and representative of the Global Alliance of Territorial Communities, the GATC, que no está funcionando. Apologies, I don't know if anyone else is trying the translation and it's working. Is it not working for anyone? Okay, well, we're just doing the introductions, so if you need to pass on for that, I can also kind of cover as well. Que Sara, estamos empezando con introducciones, pero indica si está funcionando para usted. Okay, so carrying on, after Sara, we have Dan Schuttenbelt, who is an impact measurement strategist and accelerator at Climate, based in the Netherlands, and Ana Maria, finally, Lejoki. I hope I got that kind of close. Senior technical specialist on climate change at Fauna and Flora, based in Hungary. Right, I will pass shortly to our first speaker, to May, but just to remind what we are all here for on this event, the principles for inclusive nature action. These build on the principles for locally led adaptation, which was launched with UK endorsement at COP26, and the Global Alliance for Territorial Communities, the JTC Shandia Principles. This event will discuss the background and interlinkages between these mutually reinforcing frameworks that centre equity, local leadership and systemic transformation in climate and nature action. We're going to be promoting the campaign, which is seeking endorsement for the principles for inclusive nature action from a diverse range of actors, including funders, civil society and government partners, by CBD COP17. And also, just to kind of highlight, in our own UK government funding, we support inclusive action on sustainable agriculture in partnership with Climate through the Voices for a Just Rural Transition project. Right, I will pass now to our first speaker, and I think if speakers come up, you can speak from the podium. We'll have Q&A a bit later all together on the panel, but I'll pass first to May for your presentation introducing the principles. You have 5 minutes.
Hi, can everyone hear me okay? Okay, thank you. So my name is May Ao, and I work at the International Institute for Environment and Development, and I work on promoting the locally led adaptation principles. So just a quick show of hands, who knows about the LLA principles? Okay, there are some in the audience that know them. Let me see if I have slides. Okay, great, thank you so much. Okay. So some of you are familiar with the locally led adaptation principles, and those that are not familiar, the locally led adaptation principles, there are 8 of them, and IED and lots of other partners representing grassroots groups, national governments, think tanks, civil society organizations got together to think about what are really the fundamental aspects of what makes locally led adaptation. And there are 8 principles that recognize agency of local actors, recognition, and the need for more flexible funding and programming that can enable and support the needs of local actors who are at the front lines of climate change. So the principles for inclusive nature action are very complementary to the LLA principles. There are also 8 principles for inclusive nature action. And they were also very collaboratively developed last year in a Wilton Valk event convened by DEFRA. It included 55 delegates that represented the global north, the global south, representatives from Indigenous Peoples groups, women's organizations, to think about how do you foreground nature, how do you foreground biodiversity. And so the principles for inclusive nature action play off the locally led adaptation principles, but there are some key distinctions with them that really bring to light the needs of Indigenous peoples, women, youth, and other marginalized people around the needs associated with nature. So I know I don't have so much time, given that I only have 5 minutes, so I'll just run through them quickly. I will just say also that they can now be endorsed. A draft of them was launched at the CBD COP in COP16, and there'll be an opportunity in CBD COP17 for broader endorsement. And I'll give you a quick rundown of them. So, like the principles for locally led adaptation, they talk about centering the voices of the marginalized. They focus on justice and the need for systemic transformation. Here are a few distinctions about them. They are more human rights focused and human rights centric. They in particular place the leadership of women IPLCs and local communities as they are the key actors in biodiversity action. They talk about, for example, doing no harm and recognizing the role of environmental and human rights defenders in protecting biodiversity and safeguarding of them. So there are a few distinctions between the LLA principles and them. So I'll just read them through quickly and then hand it back to you, Mark. I'm not sure how much time I've spent already. So the principle 1 is recognizing and respecting the rights, very centered in human rights. The second is around devolving decision-making and strengthening local leadership, particularly of some of the groups that I mentioned before, of women, youth, Indigenous people, and local communities, and giving them the agency, the recognition to make decisions in their own hands. The third is around recognizing and addressing structural and intersectional inequalities that are some of the key blockers in enabling biodiversity action. The fourth is encouraging flexible, adaptive biodiversity programming. So making sure that programming is responsive to the needs of the target groups and also adaptive to the local context and the needs that people call for. The fifth is also around financing and programming, just like the LLA principles, providing direct access into the hands of communities, but also having it be patient, flexible, and predictable so that funding can be readily accessed. The sixth is around recognizing the mutual value of science, local and traditional knowledge. In the LLA principles, there is a principle around understanding climate risk and uncertainty, but this principle builds on it a little more, saying traditional and local knowledge of indigenous peoples, local communities is important in having a holistic understanding of climate risk. The seventh is around promoting collaborative and coherent action and investment. And so this is making sure that we're not duplicating efforts, that we are effective and efficient in the way that we do programming so that the funds that are available can have greater impact. And lastly, as I mentioned before on the issue of human rights defenders and environmental defenders, safeguarding the need of local actors and going beyond just do no harm and actually doing good. Okay, so I'll leave it at that and hand it back to you, Mark.
Thank you so much, May. I think we can leave the slide up for now. I think Ruth is on her way, I've been told, but we're going to carry on until she gets here, and then we can change things around a little bit. On the translation, I'm very sorry. Apparently there is a global outage that Google are experiencing, which is stopping the translation from working, which I could just explain in Spanish if that's not coming across for Sara. Que la traducción no está funcionando, hay un problema global que Google está experimentando y por eso que, que no podemos ofrecer. So next we're going to turn to Sara for her intervention. We might need to do it in Spanish and then in English, so if you would be able to support, we do have luckily a backup translator here in the room, which is very helpful. So Sara from GATC is obviously an inspirational figure. I think I was fortunate enough to see you speak a couple of months ago in New York, Sara, very powerfully about the importance of the role of indigenous peoples and local communities. And I think all of us, and I've heard this a dozen times at least at events in just the past 2 days that I've been here, have been speaking about how struck we are, obviously, by being here at the gateway to the Amazon, having such a confrontation almost for developed country people like myself to see the kind of the massive role that there is here, which is fantastic for IPLCs, and really, really great to have your voice here, especially on an initiative such as this. So my question for Sara, which I'll say in English, I'll attempt to say it in Spanish, but you'll have the translation as well. So Sara, the Principles for Inclusive Nature Action were inspired as well by the Shandia Principles. What is needed to deliver on them, to center the leadership of IPLCs in protecting nature? So Sara, los principios nos inspiran también los Shandia Principios. ¿Qué es necesario para cumplirlos y también para centrar el rol tan importante para los IPLCs en proteger la naturaleza? Before Sara comes, so Ruth has joined us. I think what we will do, we'll do an effortless swap now. So when I finish, Ruth, if you want to come up to the front, I might just briefly recap for Ruth in our handover as that happens. And then Ruth will take over for the rest of the session. But Sara, you have the floor.
Buenas tardes a todas y a todos. Quiero agradecerle por este espacio tan valioso para nosotras las mujeres indígenas del movimiento de la Alianza Global de Comunidades Territoriales.
Hello everybody, I want to just thank you for this very valuable space in the name of the women's movement of the GATC, Global Alliance of Territorial Communities.
Muchas gracias por la pregunta. Cuando hablamos de inclusión, lo enfocamos también desde la perspectiva de nuestra participación como mujeres indígenas, del reconocimiento que se debe garantizar plena y efectiva en todos los procesos y espacios de toma de decisión. Como justamente estamos en esta COP sobre cambio climático, donde tenemos muchas expectativas, muchas esperanzas y también resultados concretos, no solo del simbolismo, sino a la acción.
So thank you for the question. When we talk about the concept of inclusion, we refer to the participation of women, and in particular Indigenous women, and about the recognition and the full and effective recognition of our voices in decision-making spaces. Here at COP we have high expectations, high hopes, and we're expecting concrete results.
Primero, contarle de que venimos de un proceso de trabajo muy fuerte dentro de nuestros territorios, de cómo romper todas las barreras estructurales de la violencia, del machismo, y decirle que las mujeres estamos en la primera línea de acción frente a los efectos del cambio climático, pero también estamos en la primera línea de todas las afectaciones que ocurren no provocadas por nosotros. Y desde este contexto, desde el movimiento de mujeres de la Alianza Global, nos conectamos también con los 5 mensajes que nos conectan también para reforzar justamente el reconocimiento de nuestros derechos territoriales, la consulta previa, libre e informada, la no criminalización de nuestras lideresas y líderes que defienden la vida, el acceso a financiamiento, y es aquí también donde me quiero centrar. Hoy me siento muy preocupada desde el movimiento porque sabemos que en esta COP se está hablando mucho de inversión hacia los territorios de pueblos indígenas, pero no he escuchado en ninguna política también de cómo se va a dar la inversión hacia las mujeres indígenas. Durante esta semana he estado contando de que las mujeres indígenas, para poder demostrarnos nuestro trabajo, tenemos que hacerlo 5 veces para que nos crean, pero otros espacios es diferente, no lo hacen, pero esto también tiene que cambiar. Somos sujetas de derecho y como sujetas de derecho hemos demostrado nuestro trabajo, y aquí está el principio de reconocer la participación nuestra plena y efectiva en todos los procesos, y que el acceso al financiamiento llegue directamente a impactar la vida de las mujeres, porque en nuestras manos está asegurar esos conocimientos tradicionales, la protección de nuestras aguas, el reconocimiento de nuestras tierras, está en nuestras manos.
First, I want to tell you that we are coming from a very long process with very big efforts, breaking down structural barriers of violence and sexism. We Indigenous women are at the forefront of climate change action, and we are also the ones who most suffer its negative effects. In this context, I want to remind you of the 5 demands that we defend as the GATC. Number 1, territorial rights. In second place, free, prior and informed consent. In third place, the criminalization of our leaders, which we are fighting against. In fourth place, direct financing for Indigenous peoples. And lastly, and I want to insist on this, we are very concerned about the fact that at this COP, there has been a lot of discussion about investment in Indigenous peoples' territories, but I haven't heard discussions about how this investment is going to reach women directly. This week, I have been speaking about how for women, we have to work 5 times harder than other actors in order to get the same recognitions. We have to come to realize and accept that we, Indigenous women, are right holders who have proven our value. We need recognition, we need direct financing, as we are the ones who hold the traditional knowledge and values that protect our lands.
Y quiero agradecer todo el trabajo que están realizando en el marco de estos principios, que también conecta con los principios que se ha estado trabajando desde la plataforma de Chandia, el mecanismo de que pueda llegar directamente respetando principios fundamentales de los pueblos indígenas. pero también aquí quiero tomar este espacio y la palabra también de poder seguir visibilizando e incidiendo en la región mesoamericana. Vengo de una región prácticamente invisible y también Mesoamérica tiene cara de mujer porque ahora tiene que hacer 5 veces el trabajo para que también el acceso al financiamiento llegue a Mesoamérica. Y esta es una tarea que requiere del acompañamiento de ustedes, de encontrar estrategia que alinee y reconozca todos los ecosistemas, los biomas, porque también Mesoamérica contribuye a la biodiversidad, a la mitigación y a la adaptación de los efectos del cambio climático, y allí estamos las mujeres, los pueblos indígenas, las comunidades locales, y para nosotras es importante que también estemos en el centro de esta mesa, y por eso estamos en esta alianza global que nos permite conectarnos y seguir fortaleciendo nuestros mensajes en búsqueda de ese reconocimiento de derecho pleno y efectivo.
I also want to say thank you for all these efforts on the principles that are being discussed in this space, which are also aligned with the principles of our Shandia platform, and which encourage direct investment respecting Indigenous peoples' values. I also want to take this opportunity to insist on the need to create more visibility for Mesoamerica as a region. Right now, I come from an invisible region, and Mesoamerica is also the face of youth, of women, of Indigenous peoples, all of us who are present living in the region. As I just mentioned, we have to work 5 times harder for any kind of recognition to receive financing for our region, for Mesoamerica. And this task of recognition requires your help, your support. We need to find strategies in order to recognize all ecosystems, all biomes, because we in Mesoamerica are also mitigating, adapting to climate change and fighting against climate change. We Indigenous women need a seat at the table, and this is why we are working as part of the GATC for the full and effective recognition of our rights.
Muchas gracias por ser nuestros aliados.
Thank you for being our allies.
Hello, dear friends. Apologies to be a little bit late with you today. I'm Rhys Davis. I'm the UK's Special Representative for Nature. I think you'll forgive me when I tell you that I was at an event on synergies in how we bring together the different Rio conventions, and an event where, very importantly, we were hearing from Indigenous peoples about what synergies meant to them and about how they would implement that in the real context of their lives. I also have to say that I think it's important that we heard from Sarah before anyone else, because this ought to be a place in which we're specifically listening to the voices of Indigenous women in the conversation that we're having. We will adjust the agenda very slightly, if that's okay, and I just have a few things to say before we move on. I've been lucky enough to be involved in talking to many of you about the development of the principles over the course of the last few months. You've had those presented, and I'm really delighted that in the UK government we are actively endorsing those principles. And I really want to recognize that the principles really extend the foundations which were the principles for locally led adaptation developed by the Global Alliance of Territorial Communities through the Shandia principles. It's very important that what we're doing is actively trying to build on the initiatives and leadership of Indigenous communities. And I'd also like to take the opportunity to reference the work of the Brazzaville Declaration, which was put together by Indigenous peoples across the three big forest basins, and where I was lucky enough to participate in the point at which that declaration was signed. Our work should be a response to and should build on the work of Indigenous peoples in the space that we're in. So very delighted that we're able to endorse those from a UK perspective today. And I also want to be very practical about what that might actually mean. Endorsing these principles means that we all have to go back to our government in the UK and think how this follows through in every specific piece of work, through our bilateral programming, through the investments, through the finance that we and make an effort at an individual and a collective level to ensure that those things are properly implemented. We have numerous places in which we are working in partnership with Indigenous peoples around the world, and we've had the benefit of hearing about some of them here in Pará, where the UK government is a partner with Indigenous communities and with the Brazilian government on the work on the bioeconomy, and very particularly on work around trying to help to embed, support and strengthen territorial rights and tenure for Indigenous peoples in different regions of the Amazon. I think we heard from Sarah the really important thing about centering women in those conversations, and perhaps that's the thing that we need to take back very particularly into those programs, and thank you for reminding us of that. We also have an ongoing commitment to trying to make sure that we are operationalizing the Kali Fund, for example, the fund emerging from the CBD, which is a space where we can try to test ways in which we ensure that money from the private sector is directly reaching Indigenous peoples and local communities. I want to just make one more comment, I think, very particularly about direct access finance. Direct access finance for Indigenous peoples funds that they themselves have established, and which also enables particularly finance to reach women, is something that we can try and should support through the work that we do bilaterally, but it is a very particular and important thing that we commit to doing that through the work that we as the UK play, and the boards of the multilateral development banks and the regional development banks, so that actually we are really focused on what direct access means. For example, how do Indigenous peoples funds become accredited in those institutions? And I've been listening to friends and partners from the Indigenous peoples community during the course of the last week, and that issue on accreditation has become something that is specifically being raised in numerous rooms. I think we must go and think hard about how we make that work, so that the principles are not just something that we see on a piece of paper, but they're things that we act and we live through the way in which we move forward. So this is about a critical shift in the way in which we actually address international development to prioritize local ownership and leadership. And it's fundamentally about a change in culture, which every single one of us are individually responsible for. That's partly why the UK is so proud to support the renewed Indigenous peoples and local communities land and forest tenure pledge of $1.8 billion, and also the Indigenous peoples and local communities intergovernmental land tenure commitment. And we will continue to work in partnership through the FCLP and in other spaces to be able to move that forward. Let's now move on to hear from some of the other voices that we have on the panel. And forgive me, I'm playing catch up with you all. So I think we've heard from Sarah. Mayong, I think we heard from your presentation. So I'm going to move on to the other panelists now, if I may. And I'm going to begin with Dan, if that's okay. Thanks very much. Dan is the Impact Measurement Strategist and Accelerator at Climate. And we're really looking forward to your contributions on the Just Rural Transitions project and how you work to foster inclusive dialogue with smallholder farmers. So over to you. Thank you very much.
Hi, everyone. Let me just get my slides up. I'll start in the meantime. I know we're tight on time. So hi, everyone. My name is Dan Schuttenbelt. As mentioned, I work for Climate. And I'm going to be talking about a project that we recently launched, funded by the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office and delivered in partnership with the University of Leeds, as well as the Tanzania Forest Conservation Group and Center for Indonesian Policy Studies. We're currently working across, there we go. So we're currently working across Indonesia, Tanzania, and hopefully soon Brazil. Just for a quick bit of context, our project falls under the Just Rural Transitions program that FCDO funds, which is around repurposing agricultural subsidies. It's quite a dense topic, so I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on the background, but if you're curious to hear more, I'm happy to talk to you afterwards. But our component is specifically focused on getting civil society, farmer and community voices into the policy arena. Food is so crucial for humans' survivals and humans' livelihoods. And therefore, it's really, really important that change happens in a fair and inclusive way. And what the Voices for Just Rural Transitions program is trying to do is to match on-the-ground realities with agricultural policy transformation. The way we're doing this is by setting up a global community of practice, starting in these focal countries, but hopefully expanding from there. And working through a couple of different activities. So creative and arts-based participatory methodologies, South-South learning, a big focus on that, multi-stakeholder convening and lesson learning, and then diverse outreach and influencing strategies. We kind of work through the creation of evidence, engaging in the right ways and with the right people, and then outreach, so really making sure our advocacy is focused and tailored to the right audiences. Again, I'm happy to go into more detail on this with anyone who's interested, but I'd like to focus on the principles, of course. So I'm just going to I've selected 2 principles that I thought our project links best to, and it's really more around this justice and localization aspect. And I'm going to go through those and give a quick example of some of the work we've done previously. For context, this project has only just started, so we're in a pilot phase. So there's not a lot of work that's been done yet, but we're very excited to get started. So I'm going to skip over the first principle I had on there, which was about co-leadership and ownership on the ground, but I think it's very interlinked with this principle around recognizing the mutual value of scientific and local and traditional knowledge. So as I mentioned, we're doing this in collaboration with civil society organizations and think tanks in the 3 focal countries that we're working in. And we're really using participatory methods for collaboration and leadership with them to ensure that the research and engagement that's being done has local ownership and is contextualized in local contexts, both for the integrity of the knowledge that's coming out of it, but also the sustainability of the program kind of after 2029 when we step away from it. We'll be using arts-based approaches for research, so that includes photo voice methodologies, participatory filming, and scenario planning, which I'll go into a little bit more detail on in a second. And there's a really big focus on learning from existing research, as well as kind of both ways between the organizations we're working with and us. So the University of Leeds provides this very strong knowledge base, but the organizations in Tanzania and Indonesia, as well as eventually Brazil, also have their own methodologies and knowledge bases that we'll be building on. And that connection is really important. So just quickly, an example from the University of Leeds on these arts-based methodologies. I do have to say, this is not my work, so the University of Leeds does some really incredible work with these innovative methods, and it's very exciting to see how we can take that and use it in this project. But the example is from the Foster Health Photo Voice project, which is wrapping up at the moment. And this, over 1 year, they worked with 10 farmers, 5 women and 5 men, to allow them to photograph their daily lives. So that really allowed them to shape a narrative around the problems they were having, some solutions that they work with, and acknowledging kind of their own narrative. They met once a month to come together to discuss these photographs and create a shared narrative between them. And then at the end of the year, they co-created a community exhibition that was attended by local leaders, extension officers, NGOs, the private sector. It was quite a successful project. There were a lot of benefits in terms of farmers really being able to frame their own realities and build their own confidence. There was also some impact in terms of how their visions and their narratives were integrated into some local development planning. But there's also a couple of challenges that they had, which was more around how some of their voices were also a bit dismissed. And so that really taught us, or is teaching us for the Voices for Just Real Transitions program, how it's not just important to include these voices, but also make sure they're heard. And that kind of needs to happen in a lot of different ways. One way is by presenting their narrative in the way that they want it to be presented, but also making sure we're at the right platforms and talking to the right people. So that brings me to the second principle, which is more around promoting collaborative and coherent action and investments. So this places us a little bit in the wider context of subsidy repurposing for agricultural subsidies. Climate really sees ourselves as a convener. And we've done a lot of work around subsidy repurposing in general, but also broader than that, in terms of multi-stakeholder convenings and bringing different people together, but ensuring that the right voices are in the room and that we're communicating in the right ways. So really trying to connect grounded stories to global spaces. And we're kind of trying to do this at different levels. So ensuring that farmers and communities are able to represent their own voices, but also working with farmers, not just speaking to their messages or spreading their messages ourselves, but working with the farmers to create a larger community of practice with other experts around the world that can also work together with them to then bring their messages to other policy fora where they may have less access. So just to finish off, a quick example of some of the work that Climate has done in Malawi on a soil health subsidy repurposing pilot project together with the World Bank, where we led 3 country-level consultations to shape this pilot program. We really started very broad and brought together policymakers, funders, farmers, just lots of different stakeholders, and started very broad so that they were able to narrow down the ideas themselves. So this bottom-up approach was really appreciated by a lot of the participants. It was recognized that there was the ability to have free, open, and inclusive contributions, and there were a really diverse range of stakeholders. However, there's also some improvements. Climate's all about learning from our failures, so we're really trying to make sure that in this new program, we're trying to involve more practicing farmers in these discussions. So that was some of the feedback we got, rather than just the associations or coalitions that are representing them, really ensuring that people from the ground are part of the discussions. Having bilateral consultations on the side, as well as improving communications on next steps and final outcomes of the process, all speaks to this maintaining of trust. So something that's really important is ensuring that the stakeholders trust the process and trust the people that are running it, to ensure that they can be open and also feel valued in sharing their narrative. So in general, I think with this, as well as the research approaches that I talked about, we're really trying to move beyond paradigms, talking about really technical subjects that maybe is not the most important things for farmers on the ground, but really focusing on their narratives instead, trying to shift power imbalances, and then really focus on partnerships. So those are really 3 key things that we're trying to do. And yeah, if you want to know more, there's a link to our website, but also I'm happy to talk to people afterwards. But this is a very brief overview of the project. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Dana. And I really learned something from that about breaking down barriers between different kinds of knowledge and communication. And there's been some fabulous examples around in Para. I don't know if anyone's been to the museum, the Jolda Museum, which has this extraordinary mixture of science and arts in an incredibly vibrant space, talking about bioeconomy opportunities and Indigenous Peoples' contributions. So it's very helpful to hear that from you. Thank you so much. Can I check that the translation is working for those who need it? Is it working okay? Yes? Yes, perfect. That's great to hear. Thank you. Thank you, technicians. You're very kind and very patient. Can I come to Anna Maria Lioski? I hope I've pronounced that correctly, Anna Maria. Anna Maria is the Senior Technical Specialist on Climate Change at Flora and Fauna, and works on climate proofing fauna and flora's projects and scaling up work on ecosystems-based and specifically locally led approaches to climate adaptation. And really looking forward to hearing from your work, about your work, and what you're doing globally to support locally led adaptation and nature recovery. So over to you. Thank you, Anna Maria. Cheers.
Good morning, everyone. Well, good afternoon. I am Anna Maria Lehotsky. Thank you so much for the presentation. We are delighted to be here in representing fauna and flora. So we have heard about the importance of inclusive nature action and locally led approaches. And in my presentation, I would like to tell you a little bit more about how we are integrating these approaches in climate adaptation. So I'm particularly going to focus on climate adaptation and how we are evidencing the progress on these approaches in our work. Just to give you a little bit of a background, with the increasing climate impacts that we are seeing all around the world in real time, there is a huge need to build climate resilience. And in building climate resilience, nature is playing a critical role. Ecosystems are underpinning our economies, they are sustaining livelihoods, and they are sustaining communities. Without nature, we can't deal with the climate crisis. But at the same time, to make sure that solutions work on the ground, and these solutions are context-specific and respond to the local needs and priorities, we need to make sure that we center people in these climate adaptation approaches. So at Fauna and Flora, we are building climate capacity for inclusive, locally led, nature-based climate adaptation. We have endorsed the local-led adaptation principles at COP26 a couple of years ago. And since then, we were working to operationalize these principles. So we were working on an integrated tool that I am going to tell you a little bit more about in a second. And I also wanted to just basically say that it's so important that we hold ourselves accountable to deliver on these approaches, and we measure progress on these approaches, because there are a lot of entities, organizations, governments that have endorsed the principles, but we also need to make sure that we track progress on these principles. So what we did at Fauna and Flora, we integrated the ecosystem-based and the local-led adaptation approaches so that we can maximize impact for people, climate, and nature. We have developed this integrated EVA-LLA tool. I'm sorry for the acronyms. EVA is ecosystem-based adaptation, and LLA is local-led adaptation principles, so that we are able to evidence progress towards these principles, towards the implementation of these principles. So we have integrated the EBA framework that was developed by FIBA, and the local-led adaptation principles that were developed by IIED and a bunch of other organizations working in this space. At the moment, we are piloting this tool in a couple of different contexts, from Uganda to Nicaragua and the Eastern Atlantic islands. Uganda and Nicaragua are terrestrial contexts, and in the Eastern Atlantic islands, more specifically in Cabo Verde and Sao Tome and Principe, we are working in a coastal and marine context. What's also important to note is that we have aligned the process with IIED's 360-degree accountability approach, so that we understand better the project impact from multiple perspectives, which means that we talk to the key actors who are working on delivering the adaptation piece of work, including Fauna and Flora's national team, the local implementing partner, and the local community, to better understand the project impact from their perspectives. Because of course there might be differences in our understanding of what the project delivers and what might be the impacts. We have just published a report about our findings in Nicaragua that you can access on this QR code if you would like to learn more about it. In the graph you can see one way of visualizing the results of this assessment. And again, you can read a little bit more about this in the report. And I'm so glad that everybody highlighted the importance of integrating local, traditional, and scientific knowledge when we are designing adaptation projects and implementing adaptation projects. So in our work, we also evidenced that to be able to deliver adaptation action that is effective, sustainable, and just, we need to integrate the different knowledge types. And for example, when we are working on climate risk and vulnerability assessments, it's important that we not only consider the best available science, but we also integrate the lived experiences and the local knowledge of communities that we are working with, so that those communities are able to shape the solutions in a way that fits to their priorities and to their needs. And to be able to deliver this, we need to make sure the meaningful involvement of local communities in each step of the project cycle. We also published a report about lessons from African communities on climate risk and building resilience with nature. You can access that on the QR code. And to finish up with my presentation, I just wanted to share a couple of testimonies from the communities that we work with. This is a testimony from a farmer in Kenya. I will just pause for a second so you can take in their experience summarized in this very brief quote. I also got a couple of testimonies from farmers that are already applying agroecological practices to build climate resilience. And these are a couple of testimonies from these farmers. I particularly love the last one, where the lady was explaining, I never tire of emphasizing the effects of climate change to my neighbors and setting an example to bring about change. And just sharing a couple of recommendations from the reports that we have published just before the COP. So we encourage policymakers to embed ecosystem-based and locally led adaptation approaches in NDCs and NOPs, and track progress through the indicators of the GGA that is currently being negotiated, and we really would like to see a robust framework to agreed at this COP. We also encourage practitioners to incorporate learnings from the different communities of practice. There are communities of practice working on local-led adaptation. There are communities of practice working on inclusive nature action, and it's so important to share learning between the different groups. And finally, we also encourage funders to endorse and operationalize inclusive nature action, enabling locally led and ecosystem-based approaches across their portfolios. Thank you so much for your attention, and I will hand back to Ruth.
Thank you so much, Anna Maria. And I think there's something really powerful and important about listening to the journey of conservation organizations as they begin to change their culture internally and to respond to the demands of a changing world. And thank you for illustrating that. So, dear friends, hello. It's a hot day and it's nearly the end of a COP. And there are words everywhere, just words flying around, negotiators using the kinds of words that most of us can't make head or tail of, but are really nonetheless important in trying to kind of establish these principles. Our job is to take the words and translate them into something that is concrete and has action and where it's meaningful and we can look each other in the eye and say, you asked me to do that and I did everything that I could personally to take that forward. So I'm going to try and capture very briefly the maybe key things that we could take away from this, and then let's go out into the world and maybe come back together in 6 months' time or a year's time and tell each other what it is that we've been able to do. I think I want to reflect back that Sarah was very importantly making the fundamental case that to take action in this space depends on the territorial rights, the tenure, and the safety of Indigenous peoples in the communities where they live. And I think it's important that we reflect that that is the basis of all other kinds of action. I think also what we've heard very clearly is that this kind of work begins by being able to listen to people bring to the table the Indigenous knowledge, the local knowledge, the culture, which is already providing solutions on the ground to help us collectively respond to the challenge of climate change. And that's really what the principles are about, in a way, is being able to open ourselves up to listen to the knowledge and the wisdom of other people coming forward with their suggestions and their proposals. I also just want to say, you know, that this has been an extraordinary COP for the leadership of women. Wherever I go, I see practical women driving forward action, like really saying, I'm not going to put up with this carrying on in the way that it is now. I'm going to be the person that is out there working out how you plant millions of trees, that is out there working out how you build direct access funds. And it is a really, really inspiring and wonderful thing to see mighty women at work. But it is also the case, as Sarah was pointing out to us, that it is still really difficult for money to get directly to women on the ground to enable them to take this action. So let us not forget that this is at the heart of the conversation that we're having moving forward. And then I also think there's something very important, finally, in just saying this can't be a thing that is about individual pilot projects in different places, working out little kind of bits here and there. Those things are brilliant, but this is about structural change. In the end, it's about structural change, and it's about how we reform the governance of the institutions that we work on. It's about how we actually genuinely follow through on direct access finance challenges across a whole range of different financial institutions. It's really about how we take the culture that is in this room and embed it in every single action that we take forward, because really, in the end, what we're talking about is putting Indigenous peoples and local communities in a place where they belong, which is at the heart of driving the economies and the cultures of the countries where we live. So thank you very much for being here. Really, really appreciate it. A round of applause for these fabulous women. And good luck for the rest of your COP. Enjoy, and when it's over, have a good rest, and we'll see you all soon. Thanks.